I knew at that point that mitochondria were important, and I felt strongly that they could be a bridge or some kind of a portal between the biology of energy, and which is clear is important for a lot of things, and then the mind and kind of the subjective experiences we have.
Welcome to the Brains on Brains podcast, brought to you by ECNP, where early career scientists speak with the most interesting experts in applied and translational neuroscience.
Hello, everybody. I'm Jelena Brasanac, a postdoctoral researcher at the Charité University Hospital in Berlin, Germany. And I'm also an ECNP early career member. Today is my great pleasure to talk to Professor Martin Picard from Columbia University from US. Before we dive into the conversation, I would like to briefly introduce you to his scientific career. Martin Picard is an associate professor of behavioral medicine in the departments of psychiatry and neurology at Columbia University Irving Medical Center, and also a co-director of the Science of Health program at the Mailman School of Public Health. He trained as a psychologist in neuroimmunology, then in aging mitochondrial biology, psychosocial oncology, and systems biology at McGill University. Later, as a postdoctoral fellow, he worked with cellular and animal models of mitochondrial diseases with Doug Wallace at the Center for Mitochondrial and Epigenetic Medicine, and later on stress neuroendocrinology with Bruce McKeown. As a director of the mitochondrial psychobiology group today, Martin is committed to understanding how energy, mitochondria, and transdisciplinary science can create a bright, health-focused future for medicine. Martin is also a recipient of the Bazooki Prize in Science for his groundbreaking work connecting brain energetics and mitochondria to the human experience. Outside the lab, Martin is passionate about electric cars and renewable energy, and he enjoys spending time in nature with his family. His research on the link between energy, stress, and health from the mitochondrial psychobiology group has been covered in various outlets such as New York Times, Scientific American, The New Yorker, and TEDx. Martin, welcome to the ECNP podcast. Happy to have you here.
Thank you. My pleasure.
I would like to start our conversation by taking you down the memory lane of your scientific journey. I'm very much interested to hear, how did your fascination with mitochondrial biology start? Were there some early influences or mentors who played a crucial role in shaping your research trajectory?
Good question. I started out as a semi-professional cyclist, so I was doing a lot of sports, and I was well aware that energy and mitochondria were kind of an important part of this. So that kind of was during undergrad and graduate school, and then I was blessed with really special mentors. My PhD mentor, Tanya Taivasalo, she was a mitochondrial scientist, and she gave me a lot of freedom to explore a number of different areas. So I feel really fortunate to have had her early in my trajectory. And then I worked with Elissa Epel, who discovered that stress shortens your telomeres and the stress aging connection. And Elissa had a strong influence on me and my thinking. And then I was introduced to Bruce McKeown, who discovered that the brain has glucocorticoid receptor and the brain can sense stress hormones, which was an important discovery in the 60s, I think. And Bruce was just such a wonderful mentor, and he passed a few years ago, but he, I think, had a big impact on me. And then as a postdoc, I had to decide after my PhD, what do I want to do for postdoc? And this was a big decision. And I knew at that point that mitochondria were important, and I felt strongly that they could be a bridge or some kind of a portal between the biology of energy, and which is clear is important for a lot of things, and then the mind and kind of the subjective experiences we have. And I wonder, is the postdoc the right time to bridge, or should I continue my training and the kind of the basic science of mitochondria? So I went to work with Doug Wallace, who's a mitochondrial geneticist, and who had discovered, for example, that we all have our mom's mitochondria. And he wrote an article called Mitochondria as Qi. Qi as the concept in traditional Chinese medicine, where there's another energetic dimension or reality to the human body, beyond the molecular stuff. And this article really kind of called me. So I called Doug, and I had to be persistent, but I ended up training with him. And then I learned more about mitochondria. And then it's only later that we started the bridging enterprise with psychobiology.
Thank you. Mitochondria are definitely so fascinating. And I think that it is one of those biological concepts that are also very known, or at least familiar. Everybody heard about them, even outside of the academia. So I think people leave even from school somehow knowing that there are these mitochondria, these organelles. But I'm sure unless they really go deep, they do not know how actually even more fascinating they are. And yeah, I would also to say, thank you or to recognize all the mentors that play such a pivotal role. And this is something that we hear. And I think all of us who are still on our scientific career path, we definitely see and feel the influence of our mentors. How much does it mean for going forward, also choosing the next direction and, surviving this whole very, intricate career path.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you for sharing all of that. And especially like this a little bit like feminist approach to mitochondria.
Yes, yes, power to the woman.
Yeah, definitely.
The bearer of mitochondria for humanity. Yes.
So you coined the term mitochondrial psychobiology. And I'm not sure how much familiar it is to our listeners. So I would like to ask you to maybe introduce us to the concept and tell us briefly, what do we need to know about that? What is something that we know in the field right now?
Yes. So what is mitochondrial psychobiology? And maybe I can say a few words about mitochondria, because we're assuming that everyone knows about mitochondria. I'm officially, I think, a mitochondriac. So I think about mitochondria a lot. Mitochondria are these tiny little structures inside every cell of your body. Every cell that has a nucleus and that replicates has hundreds, thousands of mitochondria. And there are only one cell type that doesn't have mitochondria, which are the red blood cells, right? And the job of the purpose of red blood cells is to transport oxygen for mitochondria everywhere in the body. So if they had mitochondria, that would probably kind of defeat their purpose. So, and the role of mitochondria in the cell is to transform energy from oxygen, the oxygen we breathe and the food we eat, converge inside the mitochondria, and then mitochondria do this very special thing. They convert chemistry into electricity. So they process energy in very important ways. And then that ends up building this charge. So it charges mitochondria like little batteries. And then mitochondria can use that charge to make ATP, the adenosine triphosphate, which is a cellular energy currency, but then dozens of other things. So mitochondria have dozens of known functions. And then as a result, they can be dysfunctional in many ways. And that includes making hormones and handling calcium at the synapse, for example, and producing signaling molecules and factors like reactive oxygen species and other metabolites that can go into the nucleus, turn on some genes, turn off some genes. And mitochondria play a very important role in cell differentiation. If you're a stem cell and you're going to become a neuron or a liver cell or a heart cell, those differentiation processes require inputs from mitochondria. And they're also involved as little biosynthetic factories. They make lipids and all sorts of things that cells need to make DNA, to make membranes. And so they were acquired like 1.5 billion years ago as little bacteria, used to be bacteria. And now we've tamed them, or maybe they've tamed the cell.
And
yeah, and they, depending what perspective you take, they seem to run the show because they have a veto on whether cells live or die, what kind of cells they become as they differentiate. And then they of course keeps the light on and it keeps the light of human consciousness. So they play a very important role.
They're much more than just the powerhouses of the cell.
Much more, yes. Yeah, the powerhouse of the cell is what most people remember from high school. Analogies are really powerful in science. We use them a lot because they convey so much depth, right? So then if you think powerhouse, like right away you have a mental construct of what this thing is. So analogies are really powerful, but they can also be very misleading because they kind of lock your mind into a certain framework. And then you think you know what it is if you have a very vivid mental image. So it's time to ditch the powerhouse analogy. It's expired. It was coined in 1957. So that's a long time ago. And now we've discovered dozens of other mitochondrial functions. So yeah, the powerhouse is not great. Mitochondria are the processor of the cell. And they process energy, but they also process hormones. They process a number of other signals and then integrate that like a little brain inside the cell and then make decisions. And then they produce signals that the cell can understand. And then they signal to other cells and kind of keep the cell collective aware of kind of the shared purpose, which is to survive and to thrive.
Yeah. I think you also put a lot of emphasis on this holistic approach. And I think even with mitochondria, that you are moving from this a little bit through this reductionistic way that we have in science, that we like to, put things in a box, is that the function of, this part of the brain or this organ is just this one thing, but usually the things are not that simple or divided in the organism or in the nature. Yes. And that's why things are more complicated, but we have to study it.
Yes, our goal, that's a great point. Our goal is to move towards the truth, right? To understand how the human body, mind, brain, how those things work, and what's the basis of human health. And I dream of a future where we understand this better and we have actual tools to help people be their best selves. And I think there's a lot of room for improvement in the way we do medicine and the way, we do science influences that. And the trajectory of neuroscience is beautiful. And I think all scientists and most scientists, 99% maybe are scientists, train as reductionists. This is kind of the way, modern science operates. Like reductionism is the framework, which often is implicit, right? You don't learn that you're becoming a reductionist, but you are through your undergrad training.
Little Descartes, we're all, I think, yeah.
Yeah, and then that's where neuroscience, started, discovering cells, discovering synapses, and then brain region, and then Broca's, said, oh, this brain area is there for speech. And then there was this whole construction of the brain of this region does this region does that. And in the last 2 decades, this perspective has, I think, been replaced or improved or kind of expanded towards a much more systemic or integrative perspective of the human brain. And now we understand that the brain and doesn't work as separate areas. There are networks and there are circuits and distributed networks that are responsible for forming memories, retrieving, and so on. So it's the same, I think, for mitochondria. So the mitochondrial field, I think, has a lot to learn from neuroscience and kind of the path and the phases that neuroscience went through in awakening to the fact that reductionism is not going to solve everything. And we're still stuck in reductionism, although there's a lot of good methods, computational methods, like neuroimaging methods, and now ways that we can overcome our reductionist tendencies. I think neuroscience is doing a good job, but we're still fundamentally stuck in this idea that we think we'll be able to explain the human mind and human consciousness through molecules bumping into each other and the brain. So I'm skeptical that this is the way forward, the best way forward, but it's certainly teaching us a lot. So I think it's a productive path, but there might be other perspectives worth considering. And that's what mitochondrial psychobiology is about, trying to bring the subjective human experience, which is kind of the object of inquiry, right? Which we're trying to understand. How do we create these conscious experiences? How does one conscious experience person influence another person? And then together, great things can happen. And this fundamentally is kind of a level of experience that's different than the biological, chemical, and they're certainly related. And if you mess up brain chemistry, you mess up the experience. But if you change the experience, you also change, brain chemistry. So there's an important thing there. And what mitochondrial psychobiology is trying to do is to explore not just the molecular basis experiences, but the energetic processes where energy flows in the cells and in the brain is largely through mitochondria. So the majority of brain energy flows through our mitochondria. So I think there's a lot to learn there. And that's what mitochondrial psychobiology is, to bring the psyche, the mind, with the bio of the mitochondria, which is bioenergetics, and then pursuing the hypothesis that energetic processes in the brain and in the whole brain-body unit are at the basis of human experiences.
Short answer to our first question. Yeah. Thank you very much for, I think, enlarging our understanding and knowledge about all these concepts. I'm sure many clinicians and many researchers will appreciate this. And this is one of the newest fields where all these bridges between mind and brain, and now, we come with this like energy production in the cell or energy transformation. We are trying to look holistically at the person and also their behavior. So different psychology or psyche or different mental states. And there it's very interesting, what you are doing in your lab and how you're also showing how much of our social experience, of our life experience actually can be reflected in these mitochondrial machinery, so to call this energetic machinery. And I just want to circle a little bit to one of your papers that I read, the last that you published from your lab this year, where you show that psychosocial experiences are associated with human brain mitochondrial biology. And what was there very striking for me is that it shows that the positive experience enhances this mitochondrial energy abundance of production. And then on the other hand, the negative experiences diminish it. So what do you think, how this also relates to this mitochondrial function in mental health? So we know that many mental health diseases, such as depression, PTSD, anxiety, bipolar disorder, are also characterized by changes in mitochondrial function. And I guess also everything else is somehow you find the changes in mitochondria. But how do you think this relates? And do you think that this mitochondrial function or dysfunction comes first and then the mental health disorder last, or maybe these mental health disorders, they actually contribute to the mitochondrial issues?
Yes, great question. Because mitochondria have many functions and they can be dysfunctional in many ways, we try not to use the term mitochondrial function and dysfunction. What this paper was about, which is the work of Caroline Trumpf, an assistant professor in our group, what Caroline did was she was able to use psychosocial measures when people were older adults before they died. Every year they would come in for an assessment. So this was a longitudinal study. And then every year they would fill out questionnaires to say how much they feel like their life has purpose and meaning. How big is their social network? How connected they feel to other people and well-being and things like this. And then negative psychosocial factors like isolation, loneliness, depression, anxiety. So you get ratings for those subjective experiences every year. And then when the person dies, their brain goes to the brain bank, and then we get a piece of brain. And then our colleagues did multi-omic analysis on those brains. So then Caroline had gene expression and proteomics from the brain of people who we knew how they were feeling right before they died. So she combined those information together and found that perhaps the most important protein in the mitochondria for energy transformation, so we're talking about the energy transforming function of mitochondria, was higher, so significantly higher in people who reported more positive psychosocial experiences. And this was mitochondria in the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the DLPFC of the brain. Mitochondria are different in different brain regions. There are different types of mitochondria or mitotypes. So what we found there, what Caroline found, is a connection between subjective experiences and the complex one or energy transformation capacity in the DLPFC mitochondria. Could be different in other brain regions and other mitochondrial functions. And this, I think, is really meaningful because it connects subjective experiences with the biology of energy in the human brain. So it's one little step, towards testing this hypothesis, that the mitochondrial psychobiology hypothesis, that our experiences are related to the flow of energy in the body and brain.
And this also can probably have a lot of implications, maybe for some prevention strategies in mental health or in clinics, or also for therapies. Do we know something about this? Are there groups working on maybe utilizing or exploring this potential of interventions targeting mitochondria, especially in these mental health or brain disorders?
Yes, thank you. That was the second part of your question. I forgot to answer. This is an important question. And yes, I think it has important implications. If the nature of our subjective experiences and if the disorders of experiences that we call psychiatric disorders, and for which we kind of lump in different types of boxes, if those are energetic in nature, and if the mind is kind of energetic in nature, I think this has tremendous implications for how we can address disorders of the mind. And I think perhaps what I feel most enthusiastic about at the moment and on the therapeutic front is using nutritional interventions that change brain energy metabolism. For maybe a couple of decades now, people have been trying to drug mitochondria, right? To find small molecules that can go and have some mitochondrial target. And largely, this has not been very successful. And we have many drugs now that kind of suppress certain symptoms, but I think those drugs were always meant to be kind of used short-term, acutely, to alleviate, distressing symptoms and, when there's danger for the patients. And now we use those drugs chronically, and then we, disrupt systemic and brain energy metabolism, and that has consequences. And in the end, I think many of the drugs we use commonly end up causing harm. And so I feel more enthusiastic about the approaches that are more energetic in nature and more holistic. And anytime you perturb a system, a drug binds a receptor or inhibits, one specific thing, it's a big challenge for the system. It did not evolve as like this one pathway in isolation, and then a second pathway came on. The brain and then the whole energetic system of the organism evolved as a whole. So if you inhibit one thing or you suppress the reuptake of one neurotransmitter, now you're shifting. The whole system needs to readapt. And then necessarily, I think this is bound to cause side effects.
Yeah.
And the best therapies we have to improve health generally, and even mental health, or things like exercise, right? If you can convince and manage, to have someone engage in a lifestyle intervention that moves energy through the body. Exercise does this amazingly. There's a recent kind of meta-analysis showing that dancing was the most effective intervention. I think this was for depression, major depressive disorder. And dancing obviously kind of has, makes energy move throughout your body and brain. And then recently there's several trials underway now for using ketogenic diet, where, you eat a variety of things that don't have sugars, especially not refined sugars. And then what this does is it changes the whole energy metabolism of the whole body and brain. And then there are ketones, certain types of food substrates or metabolites that are made by the liver and the kidneys. And so if the body isn't fed sugar on a regular basis, now it needs to switch its metabolism towards ketones, and ketones can only be used by mitochondria. Sugars can be metabolized by glycolysis and kind of fermentation, a more primitive form of energy transformation that might be a little less sustainable. So if your body is now full of ketones circulating in your blood, then the brain actually switches to ketones because it's a preferred fuel. And there's good data showing that this actually changes patterns of brain activity by EEG, by fMRI. The way the brain works actually changes a little bit if you're in the state of ketosis, nutritional ketosis. And I've now seen many patients who are coming off of their antipsychotic medications because they've been on a ketogenic diet for 3, 4, 5 months. So it's changing people's lives. So it's really powerful. And the trials so far have been small, but I think quite encouraging in terms of the efficacy of using those type of interventions. Patients with a variety of severe mental illness, including schizoaffective disorders and major depression, bipolar disease. So I think there's something there. Changing energy in the body through, diet or through movement or through other means, I think is quite
powerful, probably.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. I think it's very important. Message to convey that maybe those magic pills that we usually strive for or try to develop, in science to target specifically one certain either receptor or like pathway, maybe they are actually not the answer for all these, let's say, states, mental states or physical states that we find ourselves that are overlapping or characterizing many different mental health conditions or different diseases. And maybe those interventions that are not necessarily pharmacological, but maybe more lifestyle and maybe more holistic, they can target various aspects of our health and then contribute to the better outcomes of that treatment, and then also improve the life overall, or quality of the life for individuals who are suffering from these diseases. And I think especially those interventions that you mentioned that bring certain aspect of, joy or happiness, not just taking a pill, maybe they can really be very interesting way to go forward, which is in a way different from, I think, what we are also trying to do now in medicine, to go into this very precision medicine aspect where we are trying also to stratify a lot different patient subgroups and to develop very targeted interventions. And maybe for some disorders or for some aspects that could be the way forward. But I think it will probably also need to be combined also with these more unspecific targets.
Yes, yeah, I agree. Fundamentally, most human diseases have kind of a common root cause, and which is the inability to heal. Every day when you go to sleep, your body goes into healing mode, and then you consolidate memories and all sorts of beautiful things happens in your brain. But then the whole body goes into a very different state where you actually heal wounds, right? If you're a growing child, you grow mostly during the night. So there's a pro-healing state that the organism is evolved and, just good at naturally. And then there are things that get in the way. Chronic life stress, activates stress pathways, suppresses healing or kind of growth, maintenance, and repair processes. And then we know that psychiatric disorders and other chronic illnesses develop over time. They don't, pop up from one day to the next. And most chronic severe mental illness have common etiologies or risk factors. Early life, strife. There's a reason why early life trauma is the single most powerful risk factor for psychiatric disorders, and the insulin resistance and their metabolic. I think what we see at the surface in the clinic is like the tip of a very big metabolic iceberg, and then we see like just the little tiny manifestations of something that has been brewing and has a much bigger core underwater. If you address the core issue, then I think, yes, we might have cross-cutting, diagnostic interventions that work for, that doesn't need to be specific to a diagnosis or to a symptom. I completely agree.
Yeah. Thank you very much for all these answers. I hope that clinicians will take notes. And now I would also like to go back a little bit to your scientific career and maybe reflect on this time when you were early career researcher, and how did you navigate some of those challenges, and then also how you maybe help early career researchers in your lab navigate those challenges as a mentor today, as we already acknowledged this great importance of mentors. So how is maybe the way that you now paid forward to the next generation?
Yes.
How you mentor your
Yeah, I feel so fortunate to have had, wonderful mentors. So I try to be the best mentor I can. Something that strikes me as being really useful as a mentor is to have self-awareness, awareness of where your biases come from, where your inclinations come from, and, where your emotions and kind of, developing mindfulness for your own path as a human being, but also as a scientist. And I feel like this is really, in a way, if you can develop this self-awareness, which is kind of a lifetime process, then you can be, a better researcher and a better person and a better mentor. So I try to understand my mentees, the students, postdocs, or, anyone in our group. My dream is that our lab is a good place to develop and grow as a person and then as a scientist. So we do, activities about this. We have an annual retreat, which is coming up in a few months, and where we do activities of kind of self-awareness and where we share and we get to know each other, and then we can be there supportive for each other. So I think that's important. And then also it helps you if you have awareness of who you are as a person, then you're in much better position to take the right decisions for you in your career as a developing scientist. Do you go work with this person or that person? Do you want to go in that field or that field? Well, why? What's drawing you towards this field, right? Is it the appeal? Is it because it's a trend? Is it because, there's something in your gut that tells you this is really important? And if so, where is that coming from? So I think developing that kind of awareness helps you as a trainee make right decisions. And then as a mentor, kind of being aware of this and then knowing your trainee, on a personal level allows you to coach them better and to be there, to listen. And I think listening is a very important quality. Yes.
Yeah, I really also think that it's a very challenging job stepping into that role of a PI, of a group leader, as our training or our career path in science does not necessarily prepare you for that. Like, you are getting training in how to publish papers, how to write grants, but how to actually lead a group, how to have this group of people to work in a good, sustainable way, to have a good interactions and relationship within the group. I think it's another skill that maybe somehow gets, assumed that like future science leaders or group leaders will have, but it's not really that easily achievable.
Yes.
So what would you also advise for young aspiring PIs, how to also acquire those skills maybe?
Yeah, this is such I agree. I resonate with this. There's an assumption in science that if you can publish good papers in Nature and in Science, and then you should be a PI, and then you're going to be equipped for this. And I think most people are very ill-equipped. I was never trained to be a PI, just like I think most people. Being a PI and kind of leading a group where people can come and develop as scientists and do good science and contribute meaningfully is much more about leadership than about, scientific
work. Yeah.
The scientific process where you kind of use your intellect and integrate information and then kind of advance knowledge is very different than managing people, hiring and then helping, managing personnel. And then there's, the daily challenges of being a PI, and the daily kind of work has very little to do with science. And I've kind of purposefully trained in, like, I've taken leadership courses, and I've never seen a workshop that's kind of how to be a PI. And you go there and you spend 2 weeks kind of learning this. But when you become faculty in most institutions, there are opportunities for, developing skills and handling difficult situations, for example, or being mindful of diversity, equity, and inclusion principles. So I've taken those kind of courses, and I've worked also with a personal executive coach, someone who understands, how to develop organizations and how to kind of develop a vision, right? And then something that how to convey that vision, how to, inspire, and how to then help people and choose people, find people who resonate with this and bring them on board and just help, lead a productive, inspired group. I think this is what it's about.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds amazing. And of course, it is a lot of self-work and a lot of awareness. And this is something that I also would like to see more in science, that those efforts are acknowledged and also encouraged. And I think then we would have much better scientific environment and climate. And we would not talk a lot about the toxic working conditions and a lot of mental health issues and problems that are especially evident in the PhD population. So thank you very much for emphasizing the role of self-work and all of that, and improving yourself as a PI, as a young leader of the group. Yeah.
And maybe something I can add to this, like more practical, and that's been very useful for me. I'm not sure how useful this would be for others, but for I've had my group for 9 years now. And since I started, I've been journaling. And, many people have benefited from journaling in their own personal lives. So I've journaled in my scientific life. Thank you for sharing.
Okay.
Yes. So for 9 years, I've had as a recurring event on my calendar, and I do this on a Saturday or Sunday morning when the household is quiet and they're not like all of these deadlines and urgent things to do. So I block an hour, and it turns often to be like an hour and a half, 2 hours, where I just write about the past month. And it always starts with, how am I feeling? Not like what deadline is there and kind of what do I have to do, like the practicalities that comes later in the journaling session. But I always start with, how am I feeling? You're reflecting on the last month. And then sometimes I feel completely overwhelmed. I think the one year, so I do this monthly. And then at the end of the year, I kind of read back through the whole 12 months. And then I was reading back one around New Year's time. I was reading back as abnormally busy month. Then next month this month was abnormally intense. And then every month was kind of abnormally intense and busy. But doing this experience, like, how am I feeling? Right? Your feeling, your state of mind is the best thermometer. It's the best gauge for how you're doing and whether the decisions you're making on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, right? Do I start this project? Do I start this collaboration? Do I write this grant? These are, very specific decisions you make. And if you just make them because they present to you and at some point you become overwhelmed with all these things that maybe you don't care so much about, they don't align with your long-term vision. What is your long-term vision, right? So forcing myself to reflect monthly on what is the vision, right? What's the goal? What is the question that we want to answer? And then just keeping this at the forefront. Because on a daily basis, I think most scientists get so busy, and then there are all these pressures and deadlines that you forget. I think it's easy to forget why you're doing what you're doing. And then you end up on this kind of fast-paced train of trying to get the next paper published and trying to get, the next study started or whatever it is you're doing. And then at some point, like it stops being fulfilling, and then it stops being aligned with you as a person. So kind of keeping track of who you are as a person, why you're doing this, what's the goal, where you want to get, and kind of making a long-term plan, and then kind of keeping yourself accountable to that. And then on a yearly basis, maybe revisiting, like, is this still the plan? right? Should this still be the long-term goal? If so, what are the steps that need to happen in the next year, 5 years, 10 years? So this has been a really useful exercise for me and has helped, ground me. And then every month, how am I feeling? How are people in the lab doing? Then I list, each person and then whether they're struggling and then what can I do? So kind of helping me stay close to my people and how think about how to help them. And then I think that's been a useful way to keep myself aligned with our direction.
Thank you, Marty, so much. This was a really joy to listen, to be honest, and to think about this way to lead the lab and also to reflect on yourself. And thank you so much for the whole conversation. I hope we inspired people to think a bit more about mental health and also their relationship with this whole energy processing mitochondria and how they can implicate this or include this in their research, but also in their maybe lifestyle or health interventions. And also thank you so much on reflecting on your role as a PI and how we can support or encourage new PIs to think about this role and work on themselves. And I would like to close now the podcast by thanking to all our listeners who tuned in and just to invite them to follow the ECNP podcast because many new episodes are coming on the way. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this podcast from ECNP. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the interviewee and do not necessarily reflect the official position of ECNP. The content of this podcast should not be used in any way as the basis for treatment decisions.